Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. Welcome. We're glad you're here. I guess first we have a group of young people here. We want to welcome them. I think Mr. McMahon knows a little bit of details about their attendance. I'll recognize him now. He's going to talk to us about our group that is here today, and we do welcome them.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate it. We're very blessed to have a group come in with us today from the Maryville Christian School. Will you all please just raise your hands or stand up or make yourself known back there? I talked to a young lady named Emily, I believe. No, it wasn't Emily. It was Claire. I believe it was Claire. And she said that she brought her group in to learn what we do down here at the Capitol. So if you all don't mind, please welcome the Maryland Christian School today. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's all I have.
Thank you. And again, welcome. We're glad you all are with us today. Okay, looking at our agenda, the first item of business is the minutes of the December 2018 meeting. You have those in your packet. I'll entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Yes.
We have a second. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes as presented. Do we have any additions or corrections or discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. All opposed likewise. Next item of business is commission and staff update. Dr. Lippard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the very first thing we need to do is, or we're actually happy to do, is welcome our 5 new members to the commission, 3 of which just found out they were appointed this week, so, some of which just yesterday. So our newest members include Mayor Buddy Bradshaw, Representative John Crawford, Representative Susan Lynn, Senator John Lundberg, and Senator Katrina Robinson. Mayor Bradshaw is in his second term as mayor of Loudoun County, and he was appointed to the commission on December 18, 2018 by Lieutenant Governor McNally. Representative Lynn is the newly appointed chairman of House Finance, Ways and Means Committee, so joins us as a statutory member. Then Senator Lundberg, who's the first vice chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and Senator Robinson, Katrina Robinson, the newly elected senator representing District 33, were both appointed to the commission by Lieutenant Governor McNally on the 29th of January, so just a couple days ago. Also appointed on the 29th is Representative John Crawford, who is the chair of House Local Committee, and he was appointed by Speaker Cassada. So if you could join me in welcoming these new members. Also, in tab 2, there's a note that our former chairman, longtime chairman, Judge Mark Norris, will be joining us tomorrow morning so that we can recognize him. We have a resolution recognizing his long service to the commission and to the state of Tennessee, and that's a copy of that is also found in tab 2. Also, under commission updates under tab 2, we do have, I don't see... Representative. Okay. We have a discussion of a study that's on our work program right now, which was sent to us from Senate Bill 1989, House Bill 2154, dealing with cigarette sales and escrow payments. We originally had a panel on this bill scheduled today, and it was that panel was canceled at the request of the panelists, both the lobbyist representing the tobacco company and the state panelists. They're currently pursuing a settlement on this case and have not filed new legislation related to it. And I believe they are planning to request to both the Senate and House Finance, Ways and Means Committees to withdraw the request to the Commission for this study. They've asked if we could go ahead as a commission and vote to amend our work program to remove that study so that they could proceed in committee with withdrawing the request for the study. So if that's appropriate, Mr. Chairman would entertain a motion to that regard.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to remove that from our work program. Do we have any questions or discussion concerning the motion? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. All opposed likewise. Motion is carried.
There is one other commission item that's not mentioned in tab 2. We had originally planned to have our election of officers at our spring commission meeting, because until this week we were short 3 legislative members, and according to statute our chairman has to be appointed from one of our legislative members. Discussing it with some of our members before the meeting, I think the desire is to still go ahead and wait to the May meeting, so there's time for the members to discuss among themselves who they'd like to nominate and what have you. So if there's no objection, that's what we'd like to do, is wait until the May meeting to have the election of officers, and then our vice chair would continue to serve as acting chair.
And that means I get my pay one more meeting, so that's really important. For the young people out there, there's no pay for this position, just so you know.
Okay, see, no objection to that. We do also have 2 staff updates. We have, and we recognize these individuals before the meeting started. We have our senior research manager, Leah Eldridge. Leah, if you could stand, please. Leah has been with TACIR and the state of Tennessee for 20 years. So, and she is our number 1 researcher, our lead research manager. So she's the one that kind of keeps all of our researchers and myself and our deputy director in line on all of our research items. So if you could join me in thanking Leah for her service and congratulating her. Also, we have our senior research associate, Jennifer Berry, who's been with us for 5 years. And Jennifer, you'll all remember from the election update, was the last major study she worked on for us, but she has worked on numerous studies, and is really a great benefit to the state of Tennessee to have her on the commission. Jennifer?
And before we get into item number 3, we're going to dispense with a roll call if there's no objection, because I detect a quorum that we have today. So we will move on into item number 3, which is discussion of Public Chapter 693, the Acts of 2018, the final report for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Welcome again to our newest members. Today I'll be presenting for your approval the Commission's report directed by Public Chapter 693, Acts of 2018, on determining the amount of non-tax producing property owned by governments in Tennessee and evaluating possible excess property for more productive uses. The report covers the requested information, and adopting its recommendations will provide for more efficient and responsible management of government-owned property, particularly through better data collection to help guide decision-making in the future. The legislation directing this study, sponsored by 2 of our Commission members, Representative Mike Carter and Senator Bo Watson, has a statutory deadline of March 1st of this year. The final draft of the report, behind tab 3 in your docket books, describes a little better the various sources of property information staff obtained and reviewed for this study, and strengthens the recommendations that Tennessee should consider examples set by the federal government and several states to require more detailed reporting of property held by state agencies and coordinated planning among state agencies and with the state's Real Estate Management Division, known as STREAM. We've added more details about the other states and their property inventory reporting requirements as Table 2 in the report, which begins on page 19. Additional information from these other state agencies in Tennessee on current property uses and their future real estate needs, including more coordination with the Department of Transportation to identify excess right-of-way property, would help STREAM ensure that state-owned property is used efficiently and determine which real estate assets may be potentially surplus property that could be put to a better use, whether public or private. To supplement the recommendations described at the Commission's meeting in December in the draft report, the final version of this report includes a new recommendation that any state-owned properties sitting unused with no planned future use reported to STREAM for a period of 10 years would be automatically offered for purchase back to their previous owner or evaluated for potential sale as surplus. This recommendation begins on page 3 of the report, and similar provisions related to unused property acquired by eminent domain in other states are described on pages 23 and 24. The final report presented today also adds a variation to the draft recommendation to expand the state's use of geographic information systems, known as GIS, which you can find on page 5. We noted previously that STREAM currently lists state surplus real property for sale online only after the property has been approved for disposal by the State Building Commission and is ready to be sold. In an effort to improve transparency and provide opportunity for property's highest and best use to be achieved for the public good, this final report recommends that the state could list its complete inventory of all state-owned real property online. We say that a low-cost approach would be for STREAM to simply post and maintain the current inventory of state-owned real property as a list on its website. But however, the report provides examples from other states, beginning on page 21, of how using GIS to maintain and present this information allows for more valuable and insightful analysis. And we note that some of the additional costs to create a more robust GIS database in Tennessee could be offset by charging user fees to access some of its features, and give examples that Tennessee already has some types of GIS data sets and other information available for purchase online. The recommendations in the draft to assist local governments with the management and disposal of surplus property in December remain unchanged. The report says that the state could expand the legal authority for any city or county to establish a land bank and allow local governments to post links to their surplus real properties, including those problematic tax delinquent properties, on the state's website where the state is advertising its own surplus real property. The state could also help make county and city officials more aware of state surplus available in their jurisdictions by requiring STREAM to notify local jurisdictions before offering the properties to the public for sale, which is something they're doing already voluntarily. And they could also the state could also develop more training on local government best practices for real property management. So if there are any questions about these new recommendations or any other aspects, I'm happy to answer those at this time.
Any question by any member of the commission? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the final report. Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second to approve the final report. Any further discussion or questions concerning the report? Hearing none, all in favor of approval, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. All opposed likewise. Declare the final report approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item is under tab 4, Public Chapter 795, Acts of 2018. And this is for approval also. Mr. Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, members of the Commission. My name is Tyler Carpenter. Today I'll be presenting for your approval the Commission's final report and policy recommendations on access to affordable, healthy food. The report is provided behind tab 4 in the docket book. The report was prepared in response to Public Chapter 795, Acts of 2018, which directed the Commission to study the benefits and costs of creating a special reserve fund in the Treasury for the sole use of funding grants and loans to encourage the financing and development of supermarkets, grocery stores, and farmers markets in food deserts, whose residents tend to have a less nutritious diet and poorer health outcomes than those living in other communities. A copy of the Act can be found under Appendix A. In response to concerns raised at the December meeting, we clarified that some of the cost figures provided in the report on page 12 for opening a grocery store are estimates provided by grocery store owners to the president of the Tennessee Grocers and Convenience Store Association. As I explained at the last meeting, since 2004, only 12 states have passed legislation creating healthy food financing programs. 10 of these have appropriated their own funds to finance the development of food retailers in food deserts. 8 of the 12 states directed state agencies to award and distribute grants, loans, or both. The other 4 states chose private entities known as Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs, to award and distribute grants and loans. The federal government and private organizations also provide resources to improve access to healthy food. A list of these resources can be found in Table 1 on pages 7 through 10. These resources include vouchers for fruits and vegetables, education to encourage healthy eating, and development incentives. Research has not consistently demonstrated that simply opening new or expanding existing stores results in measurable improvements in diet and health or reduces the actual costs of obtaining healthy foods for residents in food deserts. Without an emphasis on education and community outreach, just being closer to nutritious food may be less likely to lead to citizens purchasing, properly preparing, and consuming it. The report recommends that given the cost of opening and renovating grocery stores and other similar food retailers and the complexity between improved access to healthy foods and measurable improvements in diet and health, state efforts should focus on leveraging the variety of public and private resources that are already available to assist communities in crafting solutions tailored to local needs. A state program for encouraging the development of grocery stores and other food retailers in food deserts may not be necessary, but if Tennessee were to adopt a program, the state should structure the program as a public-private partnership with one or more CDFIs or similar entities to take advantage of existing federal programs and to maximize private investment, and should incorporate consumer education and outreach into the program. This concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and at this time I ask for approval of the report.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the report? So moved, Mr. Chairman. Do we have a second? Second. We have a motion and a second. Now, we have a further discussion or questions concerning the report. Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and this is more of a comment. Thank you for your research. I know it was a lot to deal with, and as we talk about increasing access to fresh fruits and vegetables, the health impact, I'm grateful that TACIR was able to study this because as Senator Norris and I dealt with this issue of trying to figure out how to improve the health of our citizens, we thought that eradicating food deserts might come about through increasing access to fresh fruits and grocery stores. So we'll keep pressing, but I'm grateful for the research because now we know where to go with the next steps. So thank you for that again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Other questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please indicate so by saying aye. Aye. All opposed likewise. Thank you. Declare the motion approved.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, we have a panel discussion now on cord cutting and local government revenue, and I believe I'm getting ready to introduce that panel.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. My name is Matt Owen, and I will give just a brief introduction again to the study and also introduce our panelists. So again, you can find the memo for this study behind tab 5 in your docket books. This is the Commission study of cord cutting and local government revenues, and it examines factors affecting television and video entertainment services in Tennessee, whether changes in this market are affecting local government revenue, and whether any changes are warranted in the state's tax laws, cable franchising laws, or related laws. The study was requested by then Chairman Mark Norris at the January 26, 2018 Commission meeting. And at our last meeting, we heard two presentations related to this study, one from the Department of Revenue and the other from the Tennessee Public Utility Commission. The Department of Revenue provided an overview of the sales tax in Tennessee as it applies to cable, satellite, and streaming services. And the Tennessee Public Utility Commission provided an overview of cable television franchise fees and laws governing cable franchising in Tennessee. Today, you will hear from a panel of experts who will discuss the ways in which Tennessee's existing tax and fee structure and related issues affect different types of providers within the evolving marketplace for video entertainment services. And I'd like to extend a thanks on behalf of staff to our panelists for being here today, as well as for their work with staff in helping us gather information for this project. Our panelists today include Andy Mackey, Vice President of External Affairs with Comcast, who will be speaking on behalf of the Tennessee Cable Telecommunications Association. Bruce Modern, a manager of state government affairs with TDS, speaking on behalf of the Tennessee Telecommunications Association. Damon Stewart, off-counsel for Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, speaking on behalf of DISH. Jeremy Elrod, Director of Government Relations with the Tennessee Municipal Electric Power Association, speaking on behalf of both the Municipal Electric Power Association and the Tennessee Electric Cooperative Association. And Joel Phillips, President of AT&T Tennessee. I'll also mention that representatives for the Tennessee Municipal League and the Tennessee County Services Association have agreed to be available for questions if called upon, and that representatives for the Tennessee Valley Authority were invited to address any issues related to TVA's pole attachment rate formula, but were unfortunately unable to attend. Thank you, and if it pleases the chair, I'll
Go ahead, yes.
call our
If the panel would
panelists forward,
please come forward. Okay. Again, welcome, and thank you all for being here today, and we certainly appreciate it. And I think I understood that some of you may have to leave a little early, so you decided among yourselves the order that you were going to speak in. So I'll let whoever you all decide to go first, go ahead and begin their presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I will lead us off. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, members of the board, Dr. Lippard. I'm Andy Mackey, Vice President of External Affairs for Comcast, representing the Tennessee Cable and Telecommunications Association, and certainly happy to talk about how the change in landscape is impacting, and our industry is impacting local governments as well as providers themselves. But before I move on with that, I would like to just take a moment and thank Dr. Owen and Ms. Eldridge for their professionalism and their willingness to meet with us and discuss our industry's concerns, as well as questions regarding this project. I work in a lot of different states, and I'm certainly impressed with the proficiency and the knowledge that the TACIR staff brings to the table. It really is a great asset for this state and for policymakers, and just want to remark on that. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, and when I started with Comcast, our focus was on upgrading our cable networks in order to deliver more consumer choice in the form of linear content. It was a race to offer 300 channels of video services, and how many of those could be in HD. We did offer internet service at the time, but it was a little side business, and nobody really had any kind of idea how much it was going to grow and be a part of everybody's daily life. In contrast, last week Comcast reported its fourth quarter 18 results, and in that we reported that our data business had grown by 351,000 customers over the course of the quarter. And at the same time, our video customer base declined by 29,000. So you see a significant change there. And as a company, traditionally known as a cable company, we actually have more data customers than video customers. You contrast that with Netflix in their fourth quarter report. They grew their paying customers by 8.8 million over the quarter, leaving a total of 58.5 million customers in the U.S. and 80 million overall. So clearly, you have a change in the way that customers are consuming video content. There's not a decline in video consumption. It actually continues to grow, but how they consume that is certainly something we see in the marketplace and is reflected in those quarterly results. What we can also see is that tax code has not adjusted to reflect these changes in consumer behavior. And if I could just take a moment and direct you to the one-pager that you all have here, I'd just like to provide a little bit of a walkthrough there to further illustrate the point. Starting at the top, you could see the top 10 video subscription services in the U.S. Again, this was first quarter of 18, so there's going to be a little bit of variance in the numbers. But you see the number 1, the number 2, and the number 5 video content providers in the U.S. are all over-the-top providers. And in fact, the 3, Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, if you combine their subscriber bases, it exceeds the remaining 7 by customers overall. So clearly a trend there. And while the content options are largely the same, so for example, you can see Game of Thrones on really any of these options, what that means from a tax standpoint varies significantly. So if you were to watch Game of Thrones over cable or the AT&T UVerse product, you'd see a 6.1% sales tax, up to 2.75% of local sales tax, 5% franchise fee, a 1% PEG fee for a total of 14.85% in taxes. From a DBS, satellite provider standpoint, that total taxation rate would be 8.25%. And if you were consuming Game of Thrones through an over-the-top provider, you would be looking at a total sales impact of about 9.5%. And so significantly different tax structure when you're really looking at the same content just from a different provider. So the cable industry is certainly aligned with the state in terms of expanding broadband networks. We continue to invest billions of dollars in private at-risk capital to expand and upgrade our networks across the state. However, the current regulatory regime for access to the right-of-way can be burdensome, and a lot of that is because of the lack of change in the regulatory structure. And I'll give you an example that we have several jurisdictions that while we're paying millions of dollars in franchise fees to access the rights-of-way, those franchise fees are based on 5% of our video revenue. Well, the question gets asked, well, what about your internet revenue? How are we capturing that? And meanwhile, we are looking at this and saying, well, the millions of dollars we're paying is well above what the cost in terms of the impact to the rights of way are. And so you have this change in landscape, and there is a concern from a local government standpoint, rightfully so, of a declining revenue stream attached to those franchise fees. And so what it does is the absence of clarity creates a little bit of conflict when it comes to processing permits and dealing with other issues that come across, whether it be a permitting issue, a franchise fee issue, or an audit of the revenues that we do pay to the local government. So in this changing technology landscape, we would certainly encourage the state to review the regulatory environment to ensure that it is fair and balanced for all consumers, as well as providers, and encourage the deployment of new technologies while providing revenue stability to state and local governments. Communication tax and fee policies should ensure that like services are treated alike while encouraging investment and taxing in a non-discriminatory manner. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to responding to any questions.
Okay, yes, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your remarks, and I just had one question. Is it fair to suggest that, or to say that your suggestion as you compare what these different groups are paying, that we need to modernize the state's tax laws, which would include the cable franchise law? Could you dwell on that just a little bit, please? Is it fair to draw that conclusion from what you've said?
Yes, sir, absolutely. And in fact, I think we would be in favor of a bifurcation sort of separating the services from the impact to the rights-of-way. And I think we would support a new regulatory regime that attached a expense to the companies who use the rights-of-way based on that impact and the cost of that impact in the rights-of-way, and then a separate communication services tax or fee that would be applicable to all providers regardless of the technology platform that they are consuming that content.
Can I have a follow-up? If I could have just a follow-up then regarding the last comment you made then. So what you're suggesting is that we move away from a fee-based system to the actual impact, an impact-based fee. Is that what you're saying there?
Yes, sir.
Help me out. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that again?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So an example that could be looked at in terms of the impact fee might be something that was adopted in Michigan by compact with the local governments, where they computed what is the actual cost on a per linear foot fee for a provider to use those rights of way. And you pay that fee based on the actual impact in the rights of way. And this is in lieu of franchise fees, of course. And then separately, you would have some sort of services tax that would be separated and removed from the impact in the rights of way.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just to take a little side trip on some of the comments you made dealing with the right-of-way. As a local jurisdiction, for us, it is not always so much about the actual cost of your putting stuff in our right-of-ways. It's the lack of right-of-ways that we have to do the things we need to do. And so I would encourage that we go on the record of stating that it is not just about the fees, it is also about the ability to regulate what's in our right-of-way so that when we need to make some change, we have access to property that is initially set for that. And with state legislation in the past, that has often been taken away from us and said, okay, everybody's going to be treated the same, and not every community has the same amount of right-of-way that they can give out or use for themselves. So I do want us to look at both the cost of the right-of-way and the availability of the right-of-way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any further questions? Not, we'll move to the next presenter.
Sure it is. I'm Joelle Phillips. Is that better? And I want to thank you all for having us, and thank my fellow panelists for letting me go out of turn. I'm worried about catching an airplane later today. But I want to thank this committee, and in particular the staff of TACIR, for lots of great work on a lot of projects that we've worked on over the years. And I hope your ears were burning earlier today. I was on a conference call with some AT&T folks in Washington, D.C., who were saying, what is TACIR, and how come those guys know so much? Because we had sent the 911 fee recommendations and work that you all did for them to look at. And anyway, so you got lots of nice compliments from folks based on your great work. I thought I would use my time on two concepts. One is to just give everybody a couple of specifics about what is in Tennessee's law around these things, and then also to talk a little bit about AT&T's perspective on some of the policy issues we're talking about. And the first is this term franchise fee. For purposes of Tennessee law, there are two different ways that a video provider will experience what we call a franchise fee. A locally negotiated franchise and franchise fee, or a state-issued franchise fee. And that is all as a result of the last time that we updated cable franchising law to recognize that there were new entities with new technology who might want to compete against the incumbent providers of those things, and the state chose to make an option for new entrants to go get a franchise from a state entity. It's the State Public Service Commission here. And then in addition, there is the kind of overlay of federal law on franchise fee. There is a federal statute that puts some limitations on what any state can impose in the way of a franchise fee. There is also, as you've all heard, the term right-of-way has come up so many times. In state law, there is a statute that gives access to the right-of-way in exchange for what is referenced as a reasonable fee for any provider of communications technology. And that statute is an example of some really excellent legislative work in about 1885. Because rather than saying telephone or telegraph, that statute refers to any provider who is offering the speedy transmission of intelligence by telephone, telegraph, or any system that exists or may yet to be discovered. So at the time, we all recognized that we were at the precipice of this really growing, evolving technology, and the state wanted to be sure that Tennessee got the benefit of deployment of all of that. And at the same time wanted to recognize that the use of all of this right-of-way should result in a reasonable rental. So we've got franchise fees that are described much more in the nature of the way we think of a tax, a percentage of what you make doing that thing. And then reasonable rental, which is much more of what we think of as a fee, something to cover the cost of interaction with the state, as in the use of state or local right-of-way. And sometime around the late 90s, I think, there were some lawsuits to deal with how those concepts applied to other kinds of communication services. And at that time, Tennessee courts determined that reasonable rental of the right-of-way statute was not a statute that was intended to be a tax, that local governments did not have the right to just generate revenue the way you do with a tax, and that rather any kind of right-of-way fee had to be cost-based and could not be calculated as a percentage of revenue. And as you can imagine, there have been a whole lot of law review articles and other great sleep aids developed around comparing what is a tax and what is a fee, and it can become very esoteric. And as technology has evolved, we have sometimes struggled to kind of figure out how you apply one to the other. So for purposes of policy in this area, if you think back to when we came up with the ideas of video franchise fees, at the beginning, we were imagining that a local government was going to enter into a negotiation with one provider who was going to get a monopoly opportunity to deploy something that was going to use right-of-way and was going to provide what was basically a luxury service, an entertainment service. Those who didn't want to get their video service that way still could get broadcast. So when you were kind of balancing tax policy around how heavily to tax this, what if that, is too much of a burden, there were a lot of factors that weighed in favor of this is a good thing to tax, right? It's a luxury service. There are lots of other alternatives. You're giving somebody a monopoly, which is a very valuable thing. Then, as you can imagine, along came internet access, and all of a sudden, these things like traditional telephony service and traditional cable service, that same infrastructure could deliver this thing that is incredibly important and not a luxury, and something that we were very eager to see deployed. And so we might have been more in the nature of the way we were in the 1880s, where we're saying, gosh, we want to do everything we can to encourage that deployment, so maybe we want to balance more toward limiting the amount of taxing just to generate revenue as opposed to imposing fees. We definitely agree that in this arena, there are a lot of places where, depending on what kind of technology you're using or where you're doing this, you might be subject to asymmetrical fees. And those things should be corrected. We are a little wary that if you correct any one, You'll find that there's another one too, that, you know, the cable folks and AT&T, to the extent that we offer UVerse in a similar way, yes, franchise fees seem duplicative. I'm sure my friends in the satellite community feel that not having access to a certain tax discount on the first $15 of the bill, that's asymmetrical. Traditional telephony providers who pay inspection fees to the Public Service Commission when our cable and satellite, you know, friends who compete in the same way don't. So you can find a lot of these, and what I would suggest would be a better approach would be, rather than patching all of those examples, could we back up and figure out how much money do we hope to generate from this sector, and how do we want to use that? And then, now that we know the goal of how much money we're trying to create, is there a way to design something that uses just good tax policy, broaden the base, make it transparent to consumers, treat things like, you know, lower the rate, broaden the base, all of those, you know, fundamentals around tax policy. And I am pretty optimistic that Tennessee can do this. I mentioned the 911 work that TACIR did a while back. We did a similar thing around 911 fees, which were equally asymmetrical and kind of subject to changes in technology. You know, as I look at the handout that you all received before, one of the things that I would say would be a good place to start evaluating this is, in addition to these different rates, to think about, okay, but what do all those things generate? Where do they generate them? Are there some communities who don't get as much of that revenue because there aren't as many consumers consuming that? And also to remember the taxpayer. A lot of this is, you know, some of these are taxes the entity, the provider, pays. Some of them are taxes we collect up from our subscribers. And for the first time in this arena, instead of it just being about cutting a cord and going from one provider to another, I'll bet a lot of us can look at this list of providers and say, oh, wait, I'm a consumer of Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, DirecTV Now, and Comcast, potentially. So that's a new kind of challenge in this area as well. It is a much more complicated thing to think about how do you back up and do this. But I think I speak for, you know, all good companies in this arena when I say I don't think anyone expects that this industry will not be paying a significant amount of some form of tax. What we hope is that we can move to a more uniform, predictable type of tax, where rather than every time you need to cut the right-of-way coming up with a fee for that thing, or having to do a lot of different kinds of calculations, that we could just try to come up with a all-inclusive as much as possible to kind of ease the operation. And I think that predictability would be very attractive to the industry, and in turn very attractive to deployment in Tennessee. So thank you.
Okay, questions? Yes, Senator.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Phillips, I mean, thank you for that. That was actually very helpful to kind of put this in to try to trace back how we think about these things differently. And, you know, I think obviously as we think about sort of the difference between over the top and you know, the bundled services, part of the challenge, I think, is that, you know, there's some places where you're really paying for the platform, and there's some places that you're paying for the content that's coming on the platform, and then there are places where you're paying for both at the same time. And how do we disaggregate that without making you disaggregate it, or should we make? I mean, because if, you know, because back in the day, you might have just paid for one of these platform services, which also included all your content. And so getting up to that 17, 18% pay thing made sense. Whereas now I'm paying, you know, something for the platform which is at this rate, but then I've got, if I'm paying for 4 different over-the-top services, I get over the 18% rate that was historic. So how do you kind of break those two things up?
Well, and at the risk of being frustrating, I would even say you've got to add a third. In addition to the platform and the content, there is also the community impact on that the infrastructure causes. Because the point of we've got to think about, we talk about this in terms of cost of the right-of-way, but most of the cost of like actually putting the stuff in the ground, being sure it's safe, that stuff gets paid by the provider. But this idea of squeezing out of the right-of-way the opportunity to do other things, that is a meaningful thing that also has to be identified. And some members of the industry, use it in a different way than others. But what I would suggest is that all of our technology is evolving so much that while today we can say certain providers are very heavy users of right-of-way and certain providers are not, that may not stay the same. So what I would suggest is that if you back up and you say, this is how much we're trying to generate, and then you think about the category of the customer's use as one thing, and then you think about these sort of right-of-way costs as another thing, you want to try to move all of the generating of money into one thing that could be all-inclusive. And for purposes of designing this, you want to think about the consumer is going to pay. They don't get one bill anymore, and that's another challenge here. That even things like 911 fees, we used to put a lot of things on phone bills or power bills because we knew everybody had one, and it was kind of the same thing. But I'll bet at your house, what's on your bill from whatever platform you use looks very different than what's on another person's household because it depends so heavily on how you use it. But at the same time, it may not cause any cost to anyone else. And so you're going to have to look at the market for all those things. You don't want to discourage people from using things that we're trying to, encourage people to invest in and grow and build. And there's a lot of data out there on how susceptible those markets are. How much can you really burden that before you move on? One of the things we really struggled with during the 911 work was that there are applications that only cost 25 cents a month. Well, if you add a flat $1 a month fee on top of a 25-cent item, obviously the market can't bear that. And so you're going to have to kind of take them apart, study those markets, and then broaden the base so that you can get the rates down as low as possible so that you encourage the consumption. And I think when you see the growth in this area, we should all be pretty confident that you can keep these rates pretty low and still generate a lot of revenue out of that because people are adopting these things at such a terrific pace. I know that's a lot of things to think about, but at this point, I would say you'd be well served by backing up and thinking about all the things you need to put into this evaluation. And there's not going to be a sort of simplistic or sort of obvious way to switch from this math to that math. It's going to take kind of building an algorithm,
So when I think about the franchise fees and the original franchise fees and the language that were in those, that are still in those, but are not necessarily applicable because of changes in state law, one of the things that those things did was give us as local governments the opportunity to be sure that our citizens were being treated fairly. The more that comes to Nashville, the less we have that opportunity to have that input because everything's coming up here to this body and it's not being dealt with locally like it was originally. And so I have concern in communities. We're fortunate to be a upper middle class community we've got everybody's service everywhere, I think. But you just go next door to our big sister in Memphis, and there are areas there that don't have everything. And you go into rural areas, not too far from us to the north, in Haywood County or some of those, and you see that they have people that are underserved. And if there's not something locally to compel you all to say, okay, you're going to pay to help us observe that you're meeting the needs of our citizens as you promised. That's my concern, is that we lose our local voice. We have been losing it little by little, to be able to say, so that our citizens who elect us can say, you are looking out for us, not only what it looks like on the polls out there in front of my house, but also being sure that I can get the same thing that my fellow citizens across town are able to get for my family and their family. And that's what I fear, even though we're talking about this in financial terms. I don't think it's nearly that simple. I think this has a lot to do with policy. Thank you.
Well, if I might just respond, I think we agree very much that you're correct, that there is one set of things for TACIR to look at, which is about the revenue impact. And then obviously there are a lot of things that came with that revenue, whether they are obligations or privileges to providers. And you know, what makes me feel more confident in terms of some of the things that consumers were being protected by local government around. You know, originally, one of the big parts of a cable franchise was that there was a cable board who oversaw the cable prices. And so you were protecting folks from because you knew you had a monopoly. Today, I think with the advent of new applications and new ways of consuming video, the market has developed in a way where many consumers, I think, would prefer to be able to be protected by competition as opposed to a cable board on that. But to the point of what does infrastructure look like in their local area, we have some communities that are very concerned about the aesthetics, and they'd say, I don't care about having a new internet provider. I want to make sure this place stays beautiful. We have other areas who say, you know, it's not going to keep the cows up at night if this doesn't look real pretty, and I'd like to have some high-speed internet here. So that balance is going to be something that is very appropriate for local governments to stay involved in. And I think the more we can take away, we can try to separate the revenue question from the local control of things like where do you safely place things in the right of way, what kind of aesthetics do you have to observe, what is appropriate to this community, that would be an easier thing to do, because I think sometimes what the unintended consequence is that local governments want the control. They don't really want the money from a particular permit fee, but that permit fee becomes the tool that can be used to get the control, and that just slows down deployment in a way that doesn't really ever get the control up to the policymaker. It just sort of burdens the guy in the Public Works Department who isn't sure whether to issue the permit or, you know, how to apply the low voltage wiring, you know, rules to somebody. And so getting the money out of the way and coming up with the kinds of things we think are worth potentially slowing deployment to leave in local hands is, you know, the tough question, but one that you're right isn't answered by just what should the tax be.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up, please. So the only way we get your attention is with money. So I just want that out there. It's always has something to do with revenue. And we can't keep your attention if you don't have to pay us anything.
One of the challenges we have as we make recommendations on public policy for the state is that we have to focus not just on today or not just on next year, but what's the landscape going to look like in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years. And it seems like the technologies are evolving quite rapidly in the telecommunications field. We're hearing about the deployment of 5G. which is, as I understand, is going to be a very exciting, some would say, who are involved in it, new technology to offer greater bandwidth. Hearing other technologies were over the air through, similar to satellite, but it's over the air every 5 miles or so they can put something in place. And so I'm curious as to what the industry sees where we're going, because it seems to me to make little sense to be saying, let's retool a tax scheme, right, a revenue scheme, if in 2 years, 3 years, 10 years it's going to be obsolete. So I'm curious as to where the panel sees us in 5 years and 10 years so that we can focus our recommendations on revenue policy based on what we expect the reality to be.
I would offer two observations about what I see happening in the industry. One is with the very accelerated development of all kinds of new ways to use all of this kind of technology, the amount of data all of our various networks and technology have to handle has grown at a just staggering pace. Since the iPhone, so the 10 years since the iPhone, the amount of data that AT&T's network has to handle has increased by 250,000%. I mean, it's a staggering thing to get your head around. And fortunately, we have been able to handle a lot of that with new kinds of infrastructure as opposed to just adding 250,000% more poles or 250,000% more wires. So some of it is getting absorbed by better infrastructure. But a lot of the goal of that new improved infrastructure is, as you mentioned, to try to use the airway as the channel rather than a wire. So some of the hook, for lack of a better, of the money for something, there is a danger when a system that is really about permission to behave in a certain way gets it's going to be expensive for you to behave badly is the only hook, because we could get to a point where all of the places where those hooks are, because they are about wires and terrestrial things, just go away. We've talked about that with the electric industry around this kind of attachment stuff, that you want to be careful. We all want to be careful that we're not relying on attachments to our poles as a meaningful part of our economics, because what happens when somebody figures out how to do this without attaching to our poles? And we are getting a lot closer to that. I'm curious how the FCC is going to handle what we've thought of as satellites, at one level of our atmosphere or beyond our atmosphere, versus something that looks a whole lot like a satellite, is just a little lower, and then something a little lower than that that kind of is in a constellation. Is that wireless infrastructure? Is it a satellite? And so the more we can take the tax structure away from what is the piece of infrastructure and maybe go to instead what is the revenue you are generating, and let's just go ahead and build a tax that covers things, and then come up with another enforcement mechanism, whether that is something like the sort of certificate of need, or that there is a regulatory oversight, and figure out which things really need to stay at the local level because they touch local things, versus which things we can tolerate being a little further away from the consumer. I think that's going to be the challenge. But the losing wires is a significant part of what we're talking about. And things that are dynamic, where they are used one way during a really busy time and then used other ways when consumers aren't. It's that dynamic, real-time changing of infrastructure are probably the two big trends I see.
And if I can follow up, and isn't that developing technology changing the way we watch TV? Right now, I won't say who it is, but I've got my cable subscriber, and I have like 600 channels, and I maybe watch 20. And so the attraction to things like DirecTV online is that I can have the local channels and I can kind of pick and choose what I want. And so are we at risk if we focus a revenue scheme based upon the old scheme of everybody gets cable, everybody gets 300 channels, when it looks like what we're going to is an a la carte system where we pay for internet, right? I'll be revenue coming from that service being provided, and then we're just picking and choosing what we want, which is what we really do with Hulu and Netflix. I mean, most people are paying that on top of what, my guess is most people are paying that on top of what they're already paying every month for their cable and internet.
There's got to be an underlying platform, in other words. So you're right, that's a place to tax the underlying channel, whether that's a cable internet connection, a cable provided interconnection, a telephony provided, a satellite provided, a wireless provided. You pay that provider. And then, yes, there are subscription services that are paid. And I think you can design a tax system that assumes that and broaden the base, appropriately set the rate to try to generate what you want to generate. There is an additional factor to consider here, which is that some of the things like how much a la carte choice can be delivered, that the FCC feels like they get to decide. And so there are going to be some federal overhang that affect us that we won't be able to address here. But just the way consumers are evolving, it's no longer true that you can pay for the cost of some channels by making, a package and everybody sharing that cost. And maybe that's appropriate because not everybody wants to pay for those things, and the folks who, want to pay for certain kind of content might be able to support that differently. There has been such an explosion in this area that I would also suggest that there's another type of activity. There is the content, what you think of as television, but there are more and more interactive types of video content. And while that's not something I use a lot, my young friends would much prefer to spend time with video entertainment that is about almost a video game that they are doing with a whole community of other watchers at the same time. And that's another flavor, but it's also another revenue opportunity for the state.
Just a quick question. I know you have to get on an airplane, but thank you for your presentation. If this commission, Ms. Phelps, were looking at a best practices state, a state maybe in the country who's doing a lot better job at simplifying the tax and fee structure or broadening the base, lowering the rates, or implementing some of these things you've talked about, is there a state that you could point out to say they've kind of gotten their act together and implemented some of these reforms? And number two is, doesn't some of the federal legislation kind of get in the way of some of the issues that you've talked about?
Well, I'll start with the second. The fact that there is a federal overhang is going to limit what some of the things that a state could do to be very innovative. And there's good news, bad news about other states to look to for a model. There are states who have done in a particular area some good things. Florida, years ago, said we're going to stop charging people when we need them to relocate infrastructure, and we're going to stop charging them every time they touch the state right-of-way, and instead we're going to have one tax that includes all that, and that did ease a lot of the deployment, but it's just about that infrastructure. It wasn't about the consumption of those services. So I don't think there really is a state who has done it in a holistic way. The good news is that a relatively small state, a state that has the population of some cities in other states, could create something that is a good enough, modern enough way of doing this that it might attract a lot more interest in tech companies wanting to be based here, wanting to deploy here. So you've got an opportunity to be the one who cracks the code.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And hope you catch that plane. Okay, next presenter, yes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Damon Stewart. I'm of counsel at Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe. I'm here representing Dish Network, and I want to thank the Commission for giving me the opportunity to be here today and provide any information I'm able to. I'd like to just weigh in before we got too far away from the franchise fee discussion, because as some of you might suspect, the satellite Dish certainly has a different perspective on that I'm not seeing precisely contradictory, but sufficiently nuanced that I think it's important that the Commission hears it. There was a reference early on, I believe, about cable paying 14 plus something percent tax higher than satellite, and that figure encompassed franchise fees. And because the way this discussion may develop is a potential concern to the satellite industry, because how franchise fees are characterized can affect us in a negative way, given some potential solutions we've seen in the past. The idea that franchise fees are taxes, I think we can demonstrate they simply are not. One, from a sort of a common sense perspective on the technology, how it works, for a cable provider to give their service to a customer's home or business, as we know, from a central data center, I think they're called head ends, a physical cable is sent to every single customer's home or business. It gets there by digging up city streets, city property, or maybe in some cases private property. There's no, I don't think anyone would think that is just to be done for free. The use of other people's property, be it municipal, commercial, or private, certainly entails the owner to consider and ask for that use and seek compensation for that use. And that's those contracts are often at the local level negotiated. They're not like a tax bill that is imposed, but a negotiated contract. And if you look at the satellite, and by the way, so that is how you get the signal. That is how the technology works, how you provide service. One of the costs for which they acquire a right to the right-of-way, the cost is to get that signal to the customer via the use of municipal property. Compare that to, I think that was one of the points of the innovation of satellite, the new technology, was to avoid that, to come up with a new way of doing things, to avoid the impingement on other people's or municipalities' property, and to avoid that operating expense and provide the signal directly to the customer's home. That is, there is really one, if you will, sort of data collection point outside of Denver for Dish, where the signal is beamed up and then sent back down to each individual's home on those small antennas, those dishes you see on houses or sometimes out front on a pole. But there's no way satellite doesn't pay a franchise fee because there's no digging up of city streets or sidewalks. There literally is no use of property. The fundamental difference in the technology is it requires a hole in the ground and the hole dug to a customer's home and filled in, and they don't own the land that's being dug, and they pay for it. That's different from a tax. I think perhaps the strongest argument I can make to that point is nothing from me, but looking at, say, the 10Ks. These are the statements of assets and obligations that every public corporation, Dish does it too, files with the SEC, states their assets and their liabilities. If you look at a Comcast or a Charter 10K, you will see no reference at all to franchise taxes. You will see very few references to franchise fees. What you will see are references to franchise rights. Comcast values, these are an asset because they contract for, they own that right of way. that right-of-way that they can sell. For example, Comcast values those franchise rights, their words, not mine, those franchise rights at $60 billion nationally. Charter values them, I believe, at $49 billion nationally. When Charter, and I must be using a long number, I think they're a wrong number, I think they value their current rights higher. And the reason I say that is because I just looked at Charter's 2017 10K, where they indicated their purchase price for Time Warner. As we know, they bought Time Warner. They paid Time Warner $60 billion for Time Warner's franchise rights. They paid Bright House in Florida, I think, $12 billion. My point being that to characterize this as somehow as a tax, on one hand, in order to seek some sort of limitation on what we view as an operating cost, ruffles our feathers a bit, because on their books, what they tell investors, what they tell the world, and what they can get paid for if they sold it are literally billions of dollars. We see in some cases, not here, where there's an attempt made in other states to put a tax on satellite because it's the equivalent of a franchise fee. Well, AT&T, and Joel's left, AT&T has bought DirecTV. I guarantee you won't see anything in an asset column for AT&T's 10K where they purchased DirecTV's tax liability. That is a tax. But a franchise right is a contractual right that they own, they can sell, they can, and they do value on their books at billions of dollars. So as this discussion goes forward, and I'm not sure where it's going to go, but I want to be careful that there is not a conflation of this as a tax versus an operating cost. We chose a different way to deliver our service, and that by no means suggests that we have any easier road to hoe. Our operating costs are different and expensive. It costs roughly $500 million to design, construct, and launch a satellite. Dish has a fleet, I think, of around 24 that is orbiting the continental U.S. We're not suggesting any kind of tax structure that lowers that for us. That's what we have to pay to make our service work, to get our service to our customers. And I'm not necessarily being confrontational, disagreeing per se. I just want to make sure that from our perspective, as I've seen in other circumstances, this concept of tax and operating costs or right to a right-of-way conflated, and I think that, if done so, leads to unfortunate directions for satellite. Questions?
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Bruce Motter. I'm the State Government Affairs Manager with TDS Telecom. I'm also a TTA board member and a past president. The TTA consists of 20 independent and cooperatively owned telecom companies that serve predominantly rural areas covering 30% of the state. We serve approximately 207,000 customers. We've invested over $1.7 billion in Tennessee. Many of our members are offering speeds up to 1 gig. Currently, we have 8 members offering video service to approximately 33,000 customers. Of these 8, 5 operate under a statewide video franchise. However, some of them operate under both the statewide video franchise and a local franchise. This afternoon, my comments are being made on behalf of the TTA and will be organized in the following manner. Comment on the sales tax applied to video services, comment on pole attachments and railroad issues, and a general comment on content and retransmission agreements. On the sales tax issue, in the application of the state and county sales tax on video services, the current tiered approach should be simplified without impacting the state and local governments. Today, the sales tax methodology uses 3 tiers with different tax rates applied to gross sales of TV program. The state sales tax from 0 to 15 is exempt. 15 to 27 is taxed at 8.25. Above 2750 is taxed at 7%. For the county sales tax from 0 to 2750 is exempt, and above $27.50 is taxed at the full county rate. The TTA members believe there should be a more simplistic way to apply sales tax to video services. For example, my company, TDS, provides video services where the taxation of video services is like a taxable product. And for example, in Dane County, Wisconsin, there's a flat 5.5% rate applied to video service charges. By charging a single tax rate with no special decisions or tiers, it promotes business investment by reducing overly complex tax calculation. On pole attachments, another aspect of undertaking broadband construction project is factoring in pole attachment cost variation and dealing with delays for new attachments. Negotiating agreements with pole owners not subject to the FCC's regulation can result in agreements that include significant attachment rates. Additionally, TTA members have and continue to have negotiating these agreements with TVA Electric concerning pole attachment agreements. The pole attachment application and approval process can add months of delays and costs to TTA members' planned broadband deployment. For example, it took one TTA member 6 months to attach to 16 poles. On railroads and other permits, another aspect of undertaking construction projects is obtaining of the various necessary permits. While experiences seem to vary by TTA member, the common theme is that obtaining railroad and highway crossing and wildlife permits can be time-consuming and costly. If a TTA member plans to deploy fiber on federal land, the result can lead to significant delays or even have the construction stopped completely. As for working with railroads, crossing permits are expensive and require non-refundable fees, and along with very detailed plans. Additionally, the applicant must enter into a crossing agreement with the railroad with strict requirements, specifications, and standards that must be met. The application and approval process takes about 6 months on average, and the cost is in the range of $6,000. In summary, TTA believes that Tennessee should simplify its sales tax methodology for video services to encourage investment without negatively impacting the revenues of the state and local governments. The current exemption from the FCC's pole attachment regulations and formula negatively impacts private sector investment and pricing of its broadband services. The TVA needs to agree to meaningful negotiations on pole attachment rates, and the state should encourage such behavior. Tennessee should consider legislation addressing railroad crossings concerning the placement of telecommunication lines or cables owned by the railroad companies. Another aspect, and this is a general comment, I know we've talked about franchise fees and project costs before in front of TACIR. One thing we wanted to bring to the attention of TACIR is we can build it, we can provision it, then we have to deal with programmers and retransmission providers. Certainly this is a major cost driver for us. The program and retransmission agreements and rates that video service providers are challenged with. TACIR could work with the Tennessee Congressional Delegation and Federal Communications Commission by communicating the dominant market positions of the content and retransmission providers and their impact on Tennessee. In closing, the TTA members are committed to building out broadband networks that will allow for expansion of super high-speed broadband and video services in rural areas. Many of the TTA members have completed or have expansion projects currently underway. Our members are willing to continue to work with TACIR to help identify and eliminate barriers and to develop policies that promote private sector investment that allow for the efficient delivery of broadband and video services. Thank you for the time today.
Questions? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jeremy Elrod. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Tennessee Municipal Electric Power Association and its 60 municipal electric utilities, but I'm here on behalf of all of Tennessee's public and not-for-profit electric companies, which between 60 municipal electrics and 22 electric cooperatives, we serve approximately 99% of the state's electric customers. We are answerable to our customers and communities through locally appointed or elected utility boards, which keeps us especially attuned to the needs of our customers. A local utility that offers broadband and video services are responding to their community and customers' needs. And electric utilities offering these services continues to be a positive for local governments and a community's quality of life. Electric utilities who choose to enter broadband have expanded access to these services beyond areas that private providers have chosen not to serve, offered improved speeds and service, and lowered the cost of available broadband services. Electric utilities already pay property taxes or payment in lieu of taxes to local communities and are oftentimes the largest single taxpayer for a local government, for a city or county. Electric utilities that offer video services are required to pay similar taxes and franchise fees as any other provider of video service. Municipal electric utilities have been offering these services since 1999. And of course, it started similarly as a need to expand access to cable services, but of course, it's transitioned into the internet side as well. Currently, there are 13 municipal broadband providers, with others evaluating whether to offer broadband. Some offer the triple play package of internet, video, and telephone, while some forego video and offer just internet and perhaps telephone. Municipal electric utilities have pilots, payment in lieu of taxes on these services, and include amounts similar to other taxes, just as if they were a private provider of such services. And so the result is that local governments see similar revenue as if a municipal provider were a for-profit provider. In 2017, the legislature passed the Tennessee Broadband Accessibility Act, which allowed electric cooperatives to provide broadband and video services. Since that time, 8 of the state's 22 private, nonprofit electric cooperatives have moved into providing these services. Some are serving as a traditional/retail internet and video services provider through their own subsidiary, while others are partnering with third parties. Several more cooperatives are expected to enter the space in the coming months and years. Whether through a subsidiary or with a partner, these expansions are good for local tax growth because electric cooperatives pay ad valorem taxes, property tax, on the value of their facilities, in addition to franchise fee revenue generated by video sales. I'm welcome to answer any questions. Also, Mike Knotts with TECA is here, along with Mark Smith of Miller Martin.
Questions about any member of the commission? Yes, Mayor.
Mr. Elrod, when electric utilities or providers also provide internet access, do you provide it to all of your electric customers, or do you only provide it to some?
And I think it's dependent, or I'll just speak on the municipal side. I'll ask Mike Knotts to speak for TECA. But on the municipal side, that is the goal. I think it's dependent upon the utility in certain circumstances and how they build it out in the process that they're building out. But most of them do provide it to all of their electric customers. And if they don't today, that is the goal. And I would say that, I'll let Mike speak for himself.
Mr. Mayor, for an electric cooperative who enters the retail broadband space, they are required under state law to provide area coverage, which is to all of their electric customers. If they choose to partner with a third party, that does not apply.
Because I'll touch on what Mayor McDonald mentioned earlier. Probably the biggest complaint local government gets isn't about the wires, or it isn't about the right-of-ways. It's that some people in our municipality have access to services and we don't have it. How come they have something I don't have? And I would suggest that certain members of the panel consider that resolving that issue for local government might make for a more receptive audience when you're advocating for revenue structure changes. And I'll just leave it there.
Mr. Chairman, if I could also, since we've heard from all the panelists, encourage the group that is the paneling group, TACIR, to certainly include an organization such as the Tennessee Highway Association, because in the world that I live in, it's in the unincorporated part of our county, and they're cutting those roads, boring under those roads, and oftentimes the way we find out about it is after the fact, although it should be on the front end. In reality, it doesn't work that way oftentimes. So I would encourage, as we're looking at this, to certainly go out to someone like Rodney Carmichael with Tennessee Highway Association and others that would have input, because that's the biggest cost to a county government at the county level.
I think Cliff said they have spoken with with the Highway Officials Association about this issue. Further questions? If not, I want to again thank the panel. We appreciate you all being here. Very informative session, and certainly will help us as we move forward with this issue. Thank you very much. Okay, I think that concludes our business today. If you'd like to leave your books here, I think that's going to be all right. We hope nobody takes them. If they do, if they do, they have to read them. That's right, Senator. They have to read them if they take them. So we will stand adjourned till tomorrow morning at 8:30.